Welcome to a special edition of HuffPost Live. We're here in Boston at the Old South Meeting House. I'll be your host. I'm Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post, and I'm joined here by two people who have written books that have surged the top of Amazon, New York Times bestseller list. The first one, Capital in the 21st Century, by Professor Thomas Piketty. The second by Senator Elizabeth Warren, A Fighting Chance. Mm-hmm. Senator Warren's book makes the case that the system is rigged on behalf of the rich and against the middle class. Professor Piketty's book makes the same case as Senator Elizabeth Warren's does, except he makes the empirical point that this has been happening for 250 or more years. So, Senator Warren, I actually want to start with you and ask you, tell us what you made of Capital.
I saw it as a book that had a pretty straightforward thesis. The rich get richer, and everybody else gets poor. That kind of says what this book is about. And what Dr. Piketty has done is drawn the data together to show how this has happened across countries, across time. And I have to say, the first thing I thought when I read this book, or one of the first things, is I thought George Bush Sr. was right. Remember when he called trickle-down economics voodoo economics? Dr. Piketty assembled a lot of data to show that, in fact, wealth does not trickle down, it trickles up. It trickles from everyone else to those who are rich. And he demonstrates with his data that it keeps happening, as I said, over time and over country.
And we took a lot of questions from the public here, and actually a lot of questions were about this particular issue and specifically on taxation. Now, how do you propose to convince more wealthy people that taxing themselves at a fair rate is actually in their own interests as well as ours?
The difference between taxation and voluntary giving is that for taxation, in principle, it takes a majority to take decision, and not everybody has to agree. So, that's the short answer, is that, if you wait for, each single individual to be willing to pay more tax, of course, that can take a long time. But
however, we're not exactly one person, one vote here anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So
not in a post-Citizens United world.
No, that's the biggest danger with rising inequality, is that at the end it creates rising access to political voice, political power, and this can make it even more difficult. But at the same time, we have better information technologies, better opportunities to spread information and to have new forms of political mobilization than ever. So I think I'm not as pessimistic as what a number of people seem to be after they've read my book, and I feel really sad that some people were depressed apparently after they've seen that. And I think there's room for reasonable optimism as well.
This is about, we're at a moment in American history that our tax system has become so riddled with loopholes. You talk to small business owners pay and pay and pay on taxes. They pay because the loopholes aren't as available to them. But you look at Fortune 500 companies that are profitable and end up paying zero in taxes. When that happens, the cost is more than the dollars. The cost is the integrity of the system and the sense that we're all in this together. And so the first place for me that we have to start this is we have to clean up the tax system we've got. That has to be the first step.
There is a strong lack of transparency, in particular about cross-border assets, offshore wealth. And this is really very close to what Elizabeth was saying right now. And we cannot just go for more trade liberalization. We also need more regulation, in the social, environmental, and fiscal domain. For instance, we need to make sure that, multinationals and very high net worth individuals pay their share, their fair share in taxes. You cannot just make huge profits from free trade and then pay no tax anywhere. You have to find some balance so that everybody is ready to make an effort.
You argue that it was the shocks of the two world wars that lessened inequality throughout much of the 20th century. Was it a coincidence that on the eve of World War I, we had historic levels of inequality? If you look at the situation in Ukraine now, you have high inequality and you have oligarchs battling for resources. Is there, you demonstrated a connection between war and inequality. Does it go the other way? Could there be a connection between inequality and war?
Well, I think sometimes extreme inequality, if you don't manage to address it in a sort of rational and peaceful way at the domestic level, it's very tempting to blame others. So, a nationalist response is sometimes, a possible response to extreme inequality. So you start to blame, foreign workers, or to blame your neighbors, or they blame the European Union, they blame Germany, they blame China. There's always someone to blame. So yes, nationalist response, and sometimes war or conflict can be aggravated by inequality.
But Dr. Piketty has proposed, as probably most of you know, a global wealth tax, which is kind of an extension of the property tax to include a tax on other forms of property, stock, investments, et cetera. It's been called utopian by some people, but the income tax was called utopian 100 plus years ago. Could you talk a little bit about the U.S.'s experience with the income tax?
When people start to feel like it's not about how hard I work, that I face the risk that I will work hard and end up with nothing, that's when the pieces start to break apart. And so the way I see this is we are right to talk about taxes, where taxes should be appropriately placed, which parts of wealth and income we want to tax. But it's fundamentally this question about whether or not the game is rigged. And the game right now in America is rigged. It is rigged so that those at the top keep doing better and better, and everyone else is under increasing pressure, is under increasing economic strain. My view of that is why that is happening is not because it's inexorable, not because it had to be that way, but because those at the top can hire the lobbyists, can hire the lawyers. They can now, under Citizens United, affect the electoral system so powerfully that they get a set of rules written over and over and over, year by year by year. The rules don't get better for America's middle class. The rules are getting better for those who are a thin slice at the top. And that is the profound danger that we see from great inequality.
We got a ton of questions submitted on one particular issue that jumped out, and that was actually student lending. Barbara from Arkansas and Robert from Oregon, both Move On members, asked if you would support some version of student loan forgiveness. Do you think that we're headed in that direction where it's becoming so unsustainable that there might have to be some outright forgiveness?
So right now we have $1.2 trillion outstanding in student loan debt. 40 million Americans are dealing with outstanding student loans. It's starting to be so much debt that it's dragging down the economy. The reports are starting to pile up from the Fed, from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, from the Treasury Department. And what it shows is that young people are not buying homes at the rate we would anticipate. They're not starting businesses at the rate we'd anticipate. They're not buying cars. They're just not doing the economic things we should expect them to do because they are so burdened with debt. So we've got a situation, and by the way, one more piece on it, just so we're getting the big data pieces. It's growing, and it's growing fast. Over less than a decade, the amount of student loan debt out there has grown by about 70%. So think about that. We are on a fast slope up in terms of debt. So what can we do about student loan debt? There are multiple things we can do. About the outstanding student loan debt, there are forgiveness programs. That's a piece of it. We could bring down the interest rate on all student loan debt outstanding. As your book shows, it's tough. It is an uphill climb. It will not happen naturally that the world will even back out. But what it also shows is that these are not natural forces that make it happen. It's a set of rules by which we govern ourselves. And here in America, we the people get to decide what the rules are. So I get how hard this is. This is about concentrated money and power on one side, but it's about our values, our voices, and our votes on our side. I believe we can fight back. I believe we can win. I believe it.